She had no medical degree, zero working product, not a single peer-reviewed paper. And yet, at her peak, Elizabeth Holmes was worth $9 billion. She appeared on the covers of Forbes and Fortune. She was called the next Steve Jobs. The President of the United States invited her to State of the Union addresses. The U.S. military wanted her technology on the battlefield. Her company, Theranos, claimed it could run over 200 medical tests, cancer, diabetes, HIV, from a single drop of blood. No needle, no lab, just a pinprick on your finger, and the results in hours. It was the kind of breakthrough that could save millions of lives, patients in remote areas, people who couldn't afford traditional testing, soldiers in the field. The pitch was perfect. There was just one problem. The technology didn't work. It never did. And real patients, real human beings, were getting false test results that affected their medical care. And this is the story that separates every other scam we'll cover, because Elizabeth Holmes didn't just lie about money. She lied about medicine. The question isn't how she lied, it's why. Even when the math didn't add up, the smartest people in the world chose to believe her. This is the anatomy of the greatest deception in Silicon Valley history. Holmes was only 19 years old when she dropped out of Stanford to start Theranos. 1 year of chemical engineering and a very big idea. She was terrified of needles. That's the origin story she told. That personal fear, she said, was what drove her to build something that would make blood testing painless for everyone. Honestly, that's quite a compelling story. It's relatable, human, and exactly the kind of founding myth that makes investors open their checkbooks. She dressed like Steve Jobs, black turtleneck every day, deepened her voice deliberately. She'd later admit she'd practiced it. She studied how great founders spoke, how they carried themselves, what made people believe them. And she built a persona so convincing that some of the most powerful people in the world never thought to ask the one question that mattered. Does it actually work? Here's what I want you to notice, because it matters. Elizabeth Holmes is not what most people picture when they hear the word fraudster. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. She didn't promise you get-rich-quick returns. She promised to save lives. And that's a completely different kind of psychological weapon. When someone wraps a lie inside a genuinely good cause, curing disease, helping the poor, serving soldiers, our brains respond differently. We stop scrutinizing. We start rooting for them. The lie becomes almost noble, almost justified. That's not an accident. That's the design. Let's talk about the people who believed her, because this is where the story gets truly staggering. Her board of directors included 2 former secretaries of state, George Shultz and Henry Kissinger, a former Secretary of Defense, 2 former U.S. senators, the former head of the CDC, James Mattis, who would go on to become Secretary of Defense under Donald Trump. Not a single one of them was a scientist. Not a single one had any expertise in blood diagnostics, laboratory medicine, or medical technology. But every single one of them had something else, a name that other powerful people trusted instantly. Authority by association. It's a shortcut. You don't need to be credible yourself. You just need credible people standing next to you. And Holmes was extraordinary at collecting them. Rupert Murdoch invested $125 million. The Walton family, of Walmart, put in $150 million. Total investor capital, over $900 million. $900 million for a machine that didn't even work. I keep coming back to those board names, secretaries of state, former generals, senators, and none of them asked for independent verification of the technology. Why? Because when you're sitting next to George Shultz and Henry Kissinger, you assume someone else has already checked. Everyone assumes someone else checked. And that assumption, that collective deference to authority, is how a 20-something-year-old dropout ran one of the most dangerous medical frauds in American history for over a decade. Nobody wanted to be the person who raised their hand and said, "Wait, does this actually work?" Because that would mean doubting the room. And most of the time, we're just not built to do that. Here's what Theranos actually did with most of its blood samples. They ran them on conventional Siemens machines, the same equipment every other lab uses, and then presented the results as if they'd come from their own revolutionary device. Their proprietary machine, the Edison, was used for only a small fraction of tests, and even those results were frequently unreliable. Employees who raised concerns were fired or threatened with lawsuits. Holmes had a security team that monitored internal communications. One whistleblower, a young lab director, went to regulators and was immediately sued by Theranos for $25 million. Patients were getting results telling them they might have HIV when they didn't. Others were told their cancer markers were normal when they weren't. A man in Arizona got a test result that was so alarming he considered suicide before a doctor confirmed the result was almost certainly wrong. This is the part that makes Theranos different from every other fraud in this series. People got hurt. Real, medical, irreversible hurt. In 2015, a Wall Street Journal reporter named John Carreyrou started asking questions. Not elaborate, difficult questions. Simple ones. Questions that should have been asked a decade earlier. He spoke to former employees. He found scientists who'd worked on the Edison device and left because it couldn't do what Holmes claimed. He found internal documents. He published his investigation in October 2015, and Theranos' world began to crack. Regulators came in. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services found the lab operations so deficient they banned Holmes from running any lab for 2 years and revoked Theranos' laboratory certification. The machines were shut down. The Walgreens partnership, which had deployed Theranos testing centers across America, collapsed. In 2018, Holmes was charged with wire fraud and conspiracy. In 2022, she was convicted, 11 years in federal prison. Her partner and company president, Ramesh Balwani, got 13. The company that had been valued at $9 billion dissolved quietly. Worth nothing. So here's what I want you to actually take away from this. Not just the story. The mechanism. Elizabeth Holmes used 3 things that are woven into how we as humans think. First, visionary bias. We are more likely to believe people who speak with absolute certainty about a better future. Doubt feels like a failure of imagination. Asking hard questions feels like you're the person who would have told the Wright brothers to stick to bicycles. So we don't ask. Second, the noble lie. When a fraud is wrapped in genuine altruism, saving lives, serving the vulnerable, curing disease, our moral instinct to support the cause overrides our critical instinct to question the claim. We want it to be true so badly that we help make it true in our own heads. Third, authority cascade. When enough credible names are attached to something, we stop checking independently. We assume the checking has been done. Henry Kissinger didn't verify the technology. George Shultz didn't verify it. Rupert Murdoch didn't verify it. Each of them assumed someone else had. Nobody had. What genuinely unsettles me about Theranos isn't the scale of the fraud. It's how close to home those 3 psychological weapons are. Visionary bias, the noble lie, authority cascade. These aren't obscure manipulation tactics used by master criminals. They're shortcuts your brain takes every single day. Every charity that inflates its impact stats. Every startup that promises it's changing the world before it's built anything. Every business that lists its most impressive clients at the top of its website. Same tools, different scale. And until you can name the trick, you can't see it being used on you. That's not pessimism. That's a skill, and it's what this channel is here to teach you. One last thing. Tyler Shultz, George Shultz's own grandson, worked at Theranos as a young scientist. He discovered the results were unreliable and reported it internally. He was threatened with legal action, and when he went to his grandfather, a man on the board, one of the most respected statesmen in American history, to tell him what he'd found, his grandfather sided with Holmes. Think about that. A young man trying to protect patients, going to his own family, and authority bias was so powerful, so deeply embedded, that even a blood relationship couldn't override it. Tyler Shultz eventually went to regulators anyway, at enormous personal cost. He's one of the reasons this fraud was stopped. The anatomy of this lie? a borrowed identity, a board full of names, a mission too good to question, and a machine that never worked. If this video made you look twice at something you previously took on faith, that's the point. Subscribe to the archive, a new lie every week. Next week, the man who stole $65 billion and nobody noticed for 30 years.